A few months after the David was finished, early in 1505, Michelangelo received from Pope Julius II an abrupt summons that interrupted his work in Florence. So impressed was the Pope with the Pietà that he wanted the young sculptor to carve his tomb. At the end of February, the papal treasurer, Cardinal Francesco Alidozzi, paid Michelangelo an advance of 100 gold florins, the equivalent of a full year's salary for a craftsman. The sculptor then returned to Rome and entered the service of the Pope. So began what he would later call the tragedy of the tomb. Papal tombs were usually grand affairs. That of Sixtus IV, who died in 1484, was a beautiful bronze sarcophagus that had been 9 years in the making. But Julius, a stranger to all modesty, had envisioned for himself something on an entirely new scale. He had begun making plans for his sepulchre soon after his election to the papacy in 1503, ultimately conceiving of a memorial that was to be the largest since the mausoleums built for Roman emperors, such as Hadrian and Augustus. Michelangelo's design was in keeping with these tremendous ambitions, calling for a freestanding structure some 34 feet wide and 50 feet high. There were to be over 40 life-size marble statues, all set in a massive and highly detailed architectural setting of pillars, arches, and niches. On the bottom tier, a series of nude statues would represent the liberal arts, while the top would be crowned by a 10-foot-high statue of Julius wearing the papal tiara. Besides an annual salary of 1,200 ducats, roughly 10 times what the average sculptor or goldsmith could expect to earn in a single year, Michelangelo was to receive a final payment of 10,000 more. Michelangelo began this daunting project with energy and enthusiasm, spending 8 months in Carrara, 65 miles northwest of Florence, supervising the quarrying and transport of the white marble for which the town was famous. In spite of several mishaps in transit, by the start of 1506 he had unloaded more than 90 wagon loads of marble in the square before St. Peter's and moved into the workshop behind Santa Caterina. The people of Rome rejoiced at the sight of this mountain of white stone rising in front of the old basilica. No one was more excited than the Pope, who had a special walkway built to connect Michelangelo's workshop with the Vatican and thereby facilitate his visits to the Piazza Rusticucci, where he would discuss his magnificent project with the artist. Even before the marble had arrived in Rome, however, the Pope's attentions were being distracted by an even larger enterprise. Originally, he had planned for his sepulchre to stand in a church near the Colosseum, San Pietro in Vincoli, only to change his mind and decide it should be installed instead in the grander setting of St. Peter's. But soon he realized that the old basilica was in no fit state to accommodate such an impressive monument. 2.5 centuries after his death in 67 CE, the bones of St. Peter had been brought from the catacombs to this location beside the Tiber, the spot where he was believed to have been crucified, and the basilica that bears his name constructed over them. By a sad irony, this great edifice housing the tomb of St. Peter, the rock on which the Christian church was founded, therefore came to occupy a low-lying patch of marshy ground, in which, it was said, there lived snakes large enough to eat babies whole. These undesirable foundations meant that by 1505, the walls of the basilica were leaning 6 feet out of true. While various piecemeal efforts had been made to rectify the perilous situation, Julius, typically, decided to take the most drastic measures. He planned to have St. Peter's demolished and a new basilica built in its place. The destruction of the oldest and holiest church in Christendom had therefore started by the time Michelangelo returned from Carrara. Dozens of ancient tombs of saints and previous popes were smashed to rubble, and enormous pits 25 feet deep excavated for the foundations. Tons of building materials cluttered the surrounding streets and piazzas, as an army of 2,000 carpenters and stonemasons prepared themselves for the largest construction project seen anywhere in Italy since the days of...
Para seguir escuchando este audiolibro gratuitamente, haz clic en el enlace de la descripción y podrás escucharlo completo sin coste gracias a la prueba de 30 días de Audible.